Now to some breaking news just through, and CNN is reporting tonight that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. That is all the information we have just now. We will bring you an update as soon as the details come to hand. But a major breaking story in the United States. A plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center. We will bring you the details as soon as we get them. September 11 needs no explanation. It's a day I'll always remember as having delivered one of the world's worst news stories. "12 months on, I'm here in New York seeing firsthand how the city has coped with that horrific terrorist attack. It changed this famous skyline forever and shook America to its very core. Now, 1 year on, the city and the nation are trying to rebuild, despite the ongoing fear of further attacks. This vibrant city, the pulse of America, is struggling to get back to normal. There's no doubt its rhythm has changed. Its famous freewheeling nature has softened. There's now a sense of vague anxiety and collective unease in the lead-up to September 11.
In June, I was stationed in the 4-5 Battalion in Queens on a temporary assignment. One afternoon, British filmmaker Paul Barrett came to see me. Paul wanted to make a feature film about the work of a New York fire chief. He was soon going to get his movie, but neither Paul nor I could have ever imagined the nightmare that was waiting just around the corner. It started as a lovely morning that Tuesday in September. But at 0846 hours, it all changed. Life as we knew it came to a wrenching stop.
It appears an airplane crashed into the World Trade Center. Everyone out, World Trade Center, 1060. Take every available ambulance, everything you got to the World Trade Center now. That's for Marine 6. Call for days that Marine 6 advising a second plane into the World Trade Center. Okay.
I was at my sister Lisa's apartment, helping her get her son Michael ready for school. But Paul was already heading down the east side of New York toward the blazing towers. Two hijacked planes had been slammed deliberately into the Twin Towers. Their fuel load of 10,000 gallons ignited immediately. In the towers, which at that time of day housed about 15,000 people, there must have been complete panic. Many were spilling out into the street.
This is a U.S. airline. It was a plane, commercial plane coming towards us. I said, it's gonna hit my building, it's gonna hit my building. All of a sudden it made a left-hand turn and a right, and it hit. All of a sudden the whole downtown area just shook. It just literally, I thought it was an earthquake at 1.2, and then you could literally see the whole thing just explode. It was horrible.
Within minutes of arrival, a fifth alarm was transmitted for a major incident in a high-rise building.
10 for authority, Chief Gansey, fifth alarm, west investing.
50 units were arriving on the streets below. On board, the men were thinking this fire would be one hell of a fight. But for many of them, this would be their last alarm. Our communications room was being deluged with calls from desperate people trapped high in the towers.
We get reports on the 104th floor, back room, 25 to 30 people trapped. I also have the 103rd floor, 103, with people trapped also. I have the 83rd floor.
When the wind shifted, firefighters could see at least 5 floors completely involved in fire. They knew that for those inside, conditions would be dire. As the jet fuel cascaded from floor to floor, burning everything in its path, it grew in volume, fed by oxygen, sucked through the elevator shafts in the center core. The temperature of 2,000 degrees blasted everything that got in its way. Those who survived the initial impact would be incinerated in seconds. 45 minutes into the incident, 1,000 feet below, 500 firefighters have already arrived. Surrounding them are the remains of passengers from Flight 175. Over 100 firefighters had already been given orders and entered the two buildings. On West Street, Assistant Commissioner Steve Gregory had arrived. Directly below the South Tower was Safety Battalion Chief Arthur Lakiotis. They were setting up a command post. Paul Bariff had joined them with his camera. Everything was going as planned. Units were arriving and being sent to work. For some, these would be their final moments. And then it happened. It was 0955. Over 2,000 people, including 343 of my brothers, had just perished. Commissioner Steve Gregory and Safety Chief Arthur Lakiotis were thrown to the ground and survived. Paul Bariff was injured and later recovered, but some of the others that had been around them were not so lucky.
Transmitting the Mayday. Where are you, Kate?
I just told you. If you look at the World Trade Center, there's the North Pedestrian Bridge. I was on the street. I don't have much air. Please help me.
Since September 11th, I had been working almost constantly at Ground Zero. It was like being in a daze, and everything had become a blur to me. Day and night, I supervised the men in the search operations, but it was only now, in October, that the realization of what had happened had begun to sink in. It was at Ground Zero that I saw Paul again. Morning, how you doing?
Hey, all right, great.
Glad you're all right.
Yeah, fine.
I gotta go over. Our daily job was to search the areas below where the grapplers had removed debris, particularly the new voids that may have contained bodies. We were looking for anything, that is to say anything that would lead to an identity. We were hoping for complete bodies, but that was going to be a rare occasion. Any remnant of a body might help to bring closure to a family or loved one. We were satisfied to find the smallest bone. This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it's just a bright reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out?
What was that, Chief?
We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out?
Yeah.
It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing.
Great.
My men were so enthusiastic to find remains that they had to be ordered to take breaks. There was a fellow up in a void, and you know, they don't want to stop searching the voids. So our biggest job for the safety chief is keeping the boys in a safe spot.
How you doing?
All right,
Good, thanks.
Safety Chief Arthur Lakiotis was under the South Tower that morning with Steve Gregory when the collapse occurred. He, like all of us that were there, has to keep going back to that place.
I don't know which was worse, watching the people jump or know what was going to happen.
Alright, Division 1, be advised, Battalion 2 advised you have jumpers from World Trade Center, okay?
I felt terrible for the poor people that were jumping off of Tower 1 that I saw. But there's nothing we could do to help us feel it. There's just nothing we could do for them. There was just too much fire, and the elevators were all out, so the guys who were trying to get up there had to walk up 80, 90 floors with all the equipment. It just takes time.
Stairway B is the attack stairway. Stairway A is the evacuation stairway.
It's still pretty much surreal. Like you're gonna wake up someday and it's just a bullshit bad dream. But obviously it's not. It'll take time.
On a bright day in midsummer, I set out to Staten Island. It's a place where they brought the tangible metal carnage. A place where it's going to be laid to rest. It's also the place where the final scrutiny of what is left is carried out. The final search, just in case there's something there. But I wasn't prepared for what was coming. This is a battalion chief's car. This is what I'm most used to being in at the moment. I have a very close friend, Steve Belson, who I lost, and they never found him. And he was driving the chief, and actually the chief he was driving, Oriole Palmer, was also a close friend. We worked together for years. So now this hits home for these, for me right now at this range. God, it's unbelievable, the damage to these things. This is a fire marshal's car. Totally crushed. The north walkway had been leveled somewhat, not totally, but just south of that, there were the apparatus lined up against the curb, and they were crushed, and they were covered with debris, and I went down into a void to make sure it was safe for the men to go down into that void and into another void with a guy from FEMA, and he had a search cam, and at one point he also had a dog with him too. We had got an odor, and I crawled a little further down, and I found one of the brothers underneath a rear mount, and you know, we verified it with the camera and of course with the dog, and it was just something that was just unbelievable. Now, 8 months later, I look at these things, it brings me right back to day one.
Alright, unit with an urgent, go ahead.
So we got numerous people trapped here for continuous collapse. We need a hand to get them out, okay?
Are you pinned in a piece of apparatus?
Well,
Alright, we're gonna get some members over there to assist you. You have help on the way. You receive that? There is help on the way. You receive that?
These are testimony to my friends. It's a testimony to my coworkers. guys that have worked for me, guys I worked with. You know, I didn't know this was going to be like this, but it's horrible. It's horrible. This is the cab to the apparatus. This is the tip of the area ladder. Comes over the front of the rig. And the officer and the chauffeur and the men sit right behind it. Can you imagine getting out of your apparatus and that happening to you? These things. The young kids come in and make sure these things are folded perfectly in the morning, and when they go to a fire, put everything away. Look at the folds. They're perfect. They should just leave this just the way it is and make this the memorial. They've had enough. Reeling from the shock, we drove away, but there was more to come. All the debris has come here for the police and FBI to check it one more time. Somewhere in that finely sifted heap of debris are the remains of my missing brothers. It's unbelievable.
Now in there, if you can see the belts coming out?
Yeah.
Those are all the detectives in there, and they watch as the debris comes out on the belt. And now they go in there and they spend their day in there and they just watch the belt. And if something comes across, they stop the belt and take it. And it comes through here, then it goes through a finer sifting machine, and it comes out like that at the end. Then that's all picked up and used as fill.
Of the 2,823 killed on September 11, 1,493 are still missing. 141 of them are firefighters. At the end of a 24-hour shift at the station, Mike returns with me to the World Trade Center site. It's his first visit in months, and just 2 weeks before the first anniversary. Gone is the rubble and the stench, all the horror carted away. The massive cleanup leaving an enormous sanitized hole in the heart of Manhattan. With subway tunnels eerily exposed, there's nothing left but the footprint of the two massive towers. For Mike Puzzaferi, the atmosphere here has changed.
It's really different. Walking down the streets and seeing the streets lined with people who are just walking by as if it was, an exhibit, or the guys up the street selling T-shirts and the books about the tragedy of the event. It's a little different. It's taken on a different flavor for me. But I guess it's because it's closed up, I guess, to the workers, or actually to us, to the rescue workers, those that were looking for remains. It's different. It's real different.
Anytime I think of this incident, this tragedy, there's certain images that jump out at me. Is there an image that is etched in your mind that sums up the whole experience for you?
The image in my mind, I'll always look back to this, is the first night. And it was all, everyone uses the word surreal, but it was incredible. It was like being in another planet, in another world. The building right behind us was fully involved in fire, and as the smoke shifted with the wind, you would look at that and say, man, that whole thing's on fire from first floor right through the roof, and it's an old, beautiful building that they're going to salvage. But the size of the piles and the different fires, large fires, small fires, in the voids, and the superstructure, the outside steelwork of the buildings were appeared to be as if thunderbolts thrown into the ground by God himself out of the hand of God. It was unbelievable. And then the smoke and the smell, and of course the body parts that were all over, and all the firemen working, and all the other agencies here working. It was unbelievable. And all the dust in the air. It was incredible.
For Mike, every visit evokes the same feelings.
Is there one emotion that overwhelms you or overrides
Sorrow.
the situation?
Yeah, I think it was sorrow. It was just so sad to see how things happened, and just to think that all your friends, or quite a lot of your friends, are killed, or people that I worked for, worked with, and or who worked for me, they were gone. And there were so many promising people that I knew who had all these lives, these years ahead of them. They had families, they had little kids. I felt sorry all the time, and I still feel sad. It's something that still looms over me, and I can't really quite shake. I'd like to shake it, but I can't. One day you think about one person, or something comes up, and you think about, it triggers your thoughts about another person, or you had a fire with this guy, and you remember this about the fire. And all of them will be locked into my mind. I was riding the subway from downtown one day, going uptown, and I had one of the magazines, one of the fire department magazines in my bag, so I pulled it out to read, and I counted 94 people who I not only knew, but could carry conversation with and have fun, or had worked with and had a great time with. So then I started to really think to myself, my God, what is the size, the scope of this thing, I don't know. And then I got sad.
The crowds still come to look. Despite the fact the cleanup is over, it's still the biggest show in town. Thousands of locals and tourists pay homage at the site every day. For some, it's a very personal journey.
Yes, it was. Actually, I had 24 stitches in my leg, and I was covered with debris and jet fuel and the whole 9 yards. So, yeah, it was very tough. It's actually, it fluctuates because of the tourists. It's very hard to watch people take pictures and do family portraits right in front of a place where a lot of people died. So, but otherwise, yeah, it's getting better.
I have kids.
For others, it's a constant search for understanding.
There, and it's pretty devastating. It's something that when you're here, you're like, you can't believe it. It's like a dream. It's almost like saying I won the lotto. That's how I feel. And that this is something great to see, and something that's so shocking.
And there's no doubt the pain is still raw.
I'm a physician. Patients are coming in to see me more often lately because of the fact that the anniversary is coming up. The pain is being heightened a little bit more because it's close.
The site is still very much New York's shrine to those who died. Messages and photographs are ever present. Messages of thanks to the rescuers. Messages to family and friends who lost their lives. The sense of loss is palpable. For the families of the victims, the agony is ongoing. Often long after the funeral is over, more body parts are being found. It's for this reason some families are delaying funerals, waiting for that final confirmation that everything has been recovered. The heroics of the day are legendary.
Patty Brown was one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet in your life. He was one of the best firemen you would ever want to meet. His intentions were so strong. He excelled in everything he did. He was a black belt in karate. He was in the Marines. He did 2 tours in Vietnam. He was great at everything that he did. And he was one of the most gentle, nicest people you ever wanted to meet. And he was a great coworker. And he was great to work alongside when we were both lieutenants up in Harlem. He worked in 28 truck and I worked in 23 truck, and we'd go to the same fires together.
But he performed a pretty unbelievable feat that day, didn't he?
Patty always performed unbelievable feats, so it was no surprise that it appears that he was on his way up to get to the highest floor he could to give a report. One of the initials reports to the chiefs in charge of the whole operation. And he got close, but he didn't quite make it all the way up there. At the time he was getting real close, I think, to give his report. The buildings came down. Some people say it was the greatest rescue and recovery mission, or the rescue mission in the history of course, the fire department in New York, but in history. They got out about 15,000 people, I think. I don't know. Patty Brown goes up, and he never gives his life a second thought. He, of course, is always thinking about his men. They had no desire just to save themselves, and they couldn't. They had to get out as many people as they could.
Everyone who worked at the site has a story.
When we saw the widows down there, they asked us for some dirt. They had these little containers. So we got the dirt for them and gave it to them. And then they wanted a piece of scrap steel. And the iron workers there started making some crosses, and that's what we did. We gave it to the widows. And I made a special one for a good friend of mine that was killed up there. And I gave his wife one. And that's the way, that was the whole story on it.
The reality of everyday life has not only changed for those directly involved in the disaster, but for the entire city. Businesses in Lower Manhattan are still suffering. Families have moved out of the area. Locals say it will be at least a few years before things return to normal.
Businesses too are doing it tough. The government forced to offer tax-free shopping days to try to encourage people back into the area.
But those people still stiffen at the sound of sirens. They look to the sky when planes fly nearby. There is always concern when the subway stops for any reason.
Well, it's the fear factor, the fear in being in the subways. I mean, you do it. It's a New York attitude. You just go straight ahead with it. But it's the fear factor. If the train stops and the subway stop in the underground for too long, you get nervous. You wonder about high-rise buildings, elevators, anything that stops in the city, instantly you get nervous. And that goes with you wherever you go.
Ray Griffiths is an Australian who's been living in New York for 5 years. He moved into the area that week. On the morning of September 11, he was having coffee on the balcony of his apartment.
All of a sudden, when the second plane hit the South Tower and I saw the fire of smoke come out of the building, you just knew it was World War III. You just knew something unbelievable was unfolding. So I went down into the street and I had a pretty much perfect unobstructed view of the whole thing, and it was just frightening. What it did galvanise was the Australian community. The phone calls, all the Australians calling one another was really interesting. The consul were fantastic. They sent out emails to everybody. And although the Australian community is sort of disparate here, we don't all live as one group, as soon as the incident happened, the phone calls went and everybody was making sure that everybody else was okay.
Now that the cleanup is finished, the World Trade Center site is ready for rebuilding. But this will be painful. New Yorkers are bitterly divided over what should be built. While they all agree there should be a memorial, that's where the consensus ends.
Oh man, it would have to be something sacred, I guess, something, I would say nothing on top of it, leave it as a sacred, like something for them, basically, just to leave it alone. You don't want to build something on top of something that happens like this.
Part of me would love to see the towers go up again, but part of me understands that, over 3,000 people died. I don't have an answer. I really don't know what should come here. First and foremost, respect should be paid to the people who lost their lives. So whatever they do decide, as long as that's primary on their minds, that'll be the right decision.
Next week, on September the 11th, New York will mark the day with services and tributes. The city will come to a standstill, if not the nation. But for Mike and his men, it's always business as usual.
On the anniversary of September 11th, I'm going to be doing my favorite thing, which is working here. The men will find a way, and they'll find a healthy way to do it. And I have a feeling that quite a lot of them will gravitate toward their families and just remain with their children and their wives or their extended families. I think that the people of New York, firstly, have made a choice to live in the city, which I think to be the greatest city in the world. And it's only the greatest city in the world because of each individual person that lives here. They all have a story to tell. We relish in our ability to be so different. Collectively, we relish in the ability that the differences keep us together and keep us strong. I think they'll go on and on and on.